On that silent night, the sea seemed to hide more than just the darkness of its waters. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the ship's hull contrasted with the tension that hung among the few chosen for this mission. There were no official cameras, no press, not even public records. It was an expedition that shouldn't have existed, conducted far from the attention of governments and the eyes of traditional science. The reason was simple and at the same time disturbing. A set of enigmatic coordinates obtained from ancient maps and accounts of forgotten navigators pointed to a specific point in the ocean, a location where anomalous signals had been detected in recent surveys. But no one knew for sure what they would find there. The team leader, an archaeologist already discredited by academia, silently watched the sonar screen. His name, little known outside academic circles, was associated with hypotheses considered fanciful, and he was therefore aware that any misstep could bury his career forever. Even so, the conviction that something grand was about to be revealed sustained his determination. Around him, expert divers and underwater equipment technicians exchanged guarded glances. Everyone knew they were participating in something bigger than themselves, something that could rewrite history or be easily erased as yet another unproven legend. The crew's silence was broken only by brief, objective instructions. The plan was simple: descend in controlled shifts, record images, and collect samples if possible. But deep down, no one believed that would be all. The word Atlantis, avoided in official reports and notes, circulated in whispers and quick glances. None of them dared say it aloud, as if the very sound might attract an unexpected fate. There was a sense in the air of being about to cross an invisible threshold, a portal between myth and reality. Outside, the vast black ocean was illuminated only by the beams of light from the equipment, which barely managed to overcome the water's density. The sea seemed to conceal its breath, as if harboring a secret about to be revealed. Each movement of the vessel sounded heavier than usual, and anticipation slowed time. The clock ticked slowly, and each minute of waiting felt like an eternity. It was as if the ocean itself was testing the courage of these men and women, imposing silence and patience before allowing any revelation. At the heart of the expedition, the question wasn't whether they would find anything, but what they would do if they actually came across concrete evidence. The discovery could change everything: religions, science, history, and centuries-old beliefs. And it was precisely this thought that kept everyone on edge, as if walking on the edge of an invisible abyss. They knew that once the downward spiral began, there would be no turning back, and what seemed like just another secret mission could turn into the revelation the world was never ready to hear. The vessel continued its course in silence, navigating a carefully plotted route to avoid suspicion. There were no signs on the official map, nor were there any records of the mission at any archaeological institute or university. The expedition had been born from the joint effort of a few men and women who decided to risk their reputations in search of something most considered mere myth. The secrecy was absolute: confidentiality agreements, isolated communication devices, and a code of silence that prevented even close family members from knowing where they were headed. Each member carried in their eyes the mixture of fear and excitement, seen only in those about to cross the threshold between the impossible and the real. The archaeologist in charge, already marked by years of academic discredit, knew he was facing his last chance to prove his theories. After so many rejected articles and ridiculed lectures, he agreed to assemble a small team in total secrecy. The funds to finance the expedition came not from scientific institutions, but from anonymous sources willing to finance the investigation, far from political pressure. Some said they were businessmen fascinated by the occult. Others believed there were darker interests at play. In any case, the money had arrived without questions, and that was enough. The official justification was simple: to study submerged rock formations that could provide data on geological changes. But none of those present truly believed this. The coordinates guiding the ship came from ancient documents recovered from forgotten libraries, accounts by Renaissance navigators, and even fragments of translated Plato. These elements, when cross-referenced with modern mapping of the ocean floor, revealed a convergence too strange to ignore. The archaeologist believed he had found the trace of a civilization that history insisted on denying. The secret of the expedition was also the weight each person carried in silence. They knew that if something were truly found, they couldn't simply publish it in scientific journals or present it at conferences. The predictable reaction would be immediate ridicule, followed by the erasure of the data. Many on the team had already seen this fate befall colleagues who dared to challenge the official versions of history. That's why, that night, no one spoke loudly, and even their movements were measured. The feeling was of being about to discover not only a forgotten place, but also the limit of what the world is willing to accept as truth. As the sea deepened and radar signals revealed anomalous shapes, tension mounted. There was no guarantee that the descent would be safe, nor that they would find anything other than rocks and silence. But one certainty was shared by all. This was no ordinary voyage. It was a journey into the unknown, guided by clues that science had rejected, fueled by a secret that might never be told aloud. And deep in each mind pulsed the same question. If Atlantis had left some trace after millennia, were they about to be the first to witness it? Since ancient times, the name Atlantis has echoed like a whisper among philosophers, poets, and explorers. It was Plato who first described the mythical island in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, portraying it as an advanced civilization with knowledge beyond imagination for his time. According to him, Atlantis flourished in power, wealth, and technology until, through pride and corruption, it was destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophes, sinking beneath the ocean. For most modern historians, this account was nothing more than a political allegory, a literary device to discuss morality and the decadence of societies. But for a few scholars, it was a distorted memory of real events, preserved as myth over the centuries. Throughout history, expeditions and theories have emerged across the globe. Some placed Atlantis in the Mediterranean, near Crete and Santorini, linking it to the Minoan eruption. Others sought it in the Caribbean, in the Antilles, linking Mayan and Aztec legends to the lost continent. The boldest, however, claimed it stretched across the Atlantic until it touched the Americas, representing the hidden link between the ancient civilizations of the Old and New Worlds. But each hypothesis, however fascinating, faced two obstacles: the lack of definitive evidence and the scientific community's fierce resistance to accepting anything that challenged the established chronology. It was precisely at this point that the secret expedition stood out. The members weren't there merely out of curiosity or a desire for fame. They carried with them fragments of 15th century sailors' accounts, maps with enigmatic symbols, and records of submarine sightings that had been dismissed. For them, Atlantis was not just a literary myth, but rather the vague memory of a lost civilization that, at one point, actually existed. The question was no longer, did it exist, but where are its traces? As the vessel advanced through the ocean, conversations among the crew revolved around this dilemma. Some cited ancient texts, others recalled inexplicable artifacts found in excavations around the world, pieces that didn't fit into any known historical period. Some even spoke of oral traditions of indigenous peoples, describing great aquatic catastrophes and cities that disappeared into the sea. The feeling was of sailing not just over deep waters, but over layers and layers of forgotten memories, as if the ocean were a living archive holding humanity's secrets. For the lead archaeologist, the expedition was an attempt to prove that the ancients knew more than we admit. Plato, he said, hadn't invented Atlantis out of thin air. His description came from even older Egyptian traditions, accounts passed down from priests to Greek travelers. Perhaps they were exaggerations, metaphors, but the essence hid a truth. A civilization flourished and disappeared, and its ruins could lie precisely beneath the waters that now opened before them. The myth was the guiding thread, and the mission was to follow that thread until they found what remained of it. The area chosen for the descent didn't appear in any tourist guidebooks, nor on detailed maps available to the public. It was a stretch of ocean marked only by cold latitude and longitude numbers. But for the expedition members, it carried the weight of a revelation. For years, satellites had recorded small magnetic anomalies there, always dismissed as technical failures or natural phenomena. But when sonar images began to show geometric patterns on the seafloor, unlike any known rock formation, the hypothesis that something grand lurked beneath those waters became impossible to ignore. The archaeologist knew he couldn't officially present his evidence. He needed to see it with his own eyes. The place was shrouded in legend among fishermen and sailors in the region. Many claimed that, on certain nights of the full moon, lights appeared beneath the surface, as if submerged columns reflected a glow that shouldn't exist there. Others reported metallic sounds echoing from the depths, as if the sea held the echo of a forgotten civilization. There were even reports of unexplained disappearances of smaller vessels, the wreckage of which was never found. To science, it was all nothing more than superstition. But to those preparing to dive, these testimonies seemed like omens that they were about to enter forbidden territory. When the ship anchored at the exact coordinates, silence fell over the crew. The vast blue ocean stretched in all directions, but there was something different there. A charged atmosphere, as if the waters were jealous of an ancient secret. The archaeologist stared intently at the instruments, following each line of the sonar that formed before him. The images were not clear, but they clearly revealed the presence of right angles, structures that nature rarely produces so perfectly. Aligned columns, symmetrical blocks, shapes that resembled corridors and squares. Everyone's heart raced. The divers began their preparations in silence, checking their lines, tanks, and lights. Every movement seemed ritualistic, as if the entire team understood they were about to make not just a technical dive, but a symbolic crossing. The sea seemed heavier at this point, the wind blew in short gusts, and even the sky seemed darker, despite the hour. Everything conspired to give the impression that the ocean wanted to protect what was hidden. As they prepared, a question lingered in everyone's mind. If the ruins of Atlantis really lay there, how could they have been preserved for so long? Could structures built millennia ago still withstand the pressure and erosion of water? And if they did, what would that say about the level of knowledge and technology of those who built them? No one dared speak, but the tension in their eyes was the silent answer. They were facing a place that didn't fit any logic, and perhaps it was precisely this break from the ordinary that would make the expedition memorable, or cursed. The first descent began with the divers' measured breathing echoing inside their helmets. Each bubble that escaped to the surface seemed to mark a deeper step into the unknown. As they descended, natural light faded, and only the beams of their flashlights cut through the liquid darkness. For long minutes, all they saw was sand, rocks, and submerged silence. But then, slowly, the sonar in their eyes began to confirm what the map suggested. Unusual shapes stood out against the seabed. They weren't just loose rocks, but structures rising at right angles, as if the sea held fragments of a city petrified in time. The first images transmitted to the vessel caused an immediate impact. On the screen, colossal blocks were aligned so precisely that it would be impossible to attribute them to the randomness of nature. Some of these formations resembled platforms, others broken columns, and there was even what appeared to be a staircase, partially overgrown with coral and algae. Observing these images, the archaeologist received intimate confirmation of what he had always maintained. There was something there that could not be explained solely as a geological phenomenon. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to silence even the most skeptical members of the team for a moment. The divers approached cautiously. The fine sand sent up clouds at the slightest touch, and the darkness made the structures seem as if they could disappear at any moment like mirages. But the closer they got, the more evident the intentionality of those shapes became. Giant rocks were stacked one upon the other, maintaining perfect angles that had withstood the passage of centuries. In one of them, straight grooves could still be seen, as if carved by tools, a detail impossible to ignore. It was as if human hands, or something even more advanced, had shaped what now lay beneath tons of water. The video footage showed fallen columns in positions resembling corridors, alignments that resembled streets, and blocks that suggested the walls of ancient buildings. The team's imagination ran wild as reality set in. They were not looking at natural formations, but rather the remains of something larger, perhaps an entire city. Divers, experienced in exploring shipwrecks, knew how to recognize the signs of artificial structures. The difference was that this time, they weren't looking at remains of wood or corroded iron, but colossal, resistant, and ancient stones. The surface watched in silence, almost in shock. The archaeologist could barely hold back the tears as his suspicions were confirmed. The support team, previously skeptical, now stared at the monitors with the same mixture of amazement and awe. No one dared speak loudly, as if the very words could break the spell of that moment. These were only the first traces, but they were enough for everyone to realize they were facing something that would forever change the way they viewed human history. The sea, at last, had revealed its first clue. As the divers advanced toward the submerged structures, the sensation of being before something monumental became increasingly intense. The columns, previously seen only as unusual geometric shapes, revealed details that could not be ignored. On some surfaces, covered in coral and algae, more delicate features appeared, such as lines engraved in circular patterns and unfamiliar symbols. These marks resembled inscriptions, but unlike any previously documented alphabet. The archaeologist, observing everything from the surface through the cameras, could hardly believe his eyes. He knew that if these recordings were authentic, they would not only confirm human intervention, but also indicate the existence of a lost language, possibly the cultural signature of a vanished civilization. The divers transmitted their reactions in real time, albeit in a restrained manner. One of them pointed to a massive stone, tilted as if it had been knocked over by a colossal force. On it, spiraling symbols stood out under the artificial light, creating a contrast between the deep shadow of the ocean and the metallic glow of the flashlights. Another diver found a pattern of parallel lines, as if they were records engraved on a kind of mural. Silence became the most eloquent response. Everyone knew this was the kind of evidence that could redefine archaeology. The more they explored, the more details emerged that were impossible to classify as mere chance. In a formation seemingly resembling a portal, there were carvings resembling stylized humanoid figures, with proportions different from those of known humans. Some had elongated heads, others arms outstretched in a ritualistic position. It was impossible to confirm any interpretation, but the divers felt they were facing symbolic representations. The cold, dense water around them heightened the atmosphere of mystery, as if each discovery were accompanied by an invisible force watching them. On the vessel, the technicians frantically recorded all the data, trying to capture every detail before the sea mist and the stirred-up sediments covered the remains again. The archaeologist, though overcome with emotion, was already considering the difficulties that lay ahead. How could he present to the world images that challenged accepted chronology without being accused of fraud? How could he protect the evidence from interests that might seek to bury it again? The escalating mystery wasn't limited to the seabed. It also expanded to the realm of the consequences the discovery would bring. The divers, even trained to maintain technical focus, couldn't help but whisper. Some said they felt a strange vibration in the air, as if the sea were emitting a muffled, continuous sound. Others reported the sensation of being watched, even in the midst of the underwater void. This wasn't just archaeology. It was as if the ocean held a living memory, resisting complete surrender. The mystery grew in layers, revealing itself not only in the engraved symbols, but in the profound silence itself, which seemed to command respect. The next descent was marked by a different sense of anticipation. It was no longer just a matter of confirming whether the structures were natural or artificial. Now everyone was aware that something much larger awaited in the depths. Guided by sonar images and the notes from the first foray, the divers advanced deeper, traversing a corridor of fallen columns that seemed to lead them to a central area. The silence was almost absolute, interrupted only by the rhythmic breathing of their equipment. Even the glow of their flashlights seemed more intense, as if the ocean wanted to reveal, little by little, what it had kept hidden for millennia. Suddenly, the entrance to a submerged chamber appeared before them. It wasn't an irregular formation, but a space bounded by walls of blocks, fitted together with impressive precision. The stones, despite the pressure and erosion of the sea, remained firm, as if designed to withstand the test of time. The divers' hearts raced, and from the surface all that could be heard was the archaeologist murmuring, "It's impossible," but it was real. They had found what appeared to be an intact enclosure, preserved against all odds. Cautiously, they crossed the opening and entered the chamber. The interior revealed something that surpassed any hypothesis or theory. Amid the sediment-covered walls, colossal statues rose, representing humanoid figures of enigmatic proportions. Some had elongated heads, Others, facial features impossible to associate with known cultures. The outstretched hands seemed to carry objects or symbols, and the carved expressions conveyed a mix of serenity and power. The lantern light made shadows dance across the stone faces, creating the sensation that the ancient inhabitants were observing the modern visitors. In the center of the chamber, something even more surprising. A structure resembling a stone altar or table, with intricate carvings forming perfect geometric designs. The shapes resembled mandalas or energy diagrams, engraved with such precision that they appeared to be made with modern technology. One of the divers, experienced in ancient artifacts, approached and ran his hand lightly over the inscriptions, confirming that they were deep carvings, not mere superficial marks. The archaeologist, seeing this through the cameras, couldn't contain his trembling voice. This couldn't have been made with the tools we know from that period. The discovery reached its climax. They were not just ruins, but a testament to advanced knowledge, preserved at the bottom of the sea like an enigma. The climax lay not only in the beauty and grandeur of those sculptures, but in what they signified. The possibility that Atlantis was not a literary myth, but a civilization that mastered knowledge and techniques still incomprehensible to us. The weight of that revelation fell upon each member of the team like an invisible tide. Everyone knew they were facing something that could forever alter the understanding of human history. And as they recorded every detail, a collective feeling enveloped them. It wasn't just admiration, it was also fear. For if that civilization truly existed, the inevitable question arose: how could it have disappeared so completely, leaving only submerged echoes? The climax of the discovery brought not only answers, but a new abyss of mysteries. The news of the discovery spread through the ship like a silent bolt of lightning. No one shouted, no one celebrated, but faces betrayed the impact of something impossible to ignore. The technicians monitoring the images in real time exchanged looks of astonishment, and even the most skeptical, those who had embarked with the intention of unmasking the expedition, now remained speechless before what they saw on the screens. The archaeologist, his hands trembling on the control table, couldn't decide whether to cry with relief or fear. Years of academic humiliation, of being called a fancier, converged in that moment when reality surpassed all imagination. He knew they had crossed a line of no return. The immediate reaction was one of reverence and also of doubt. Some team members believed this was the moment to share everything with the world, show the images, call the press, and challenge the official story. But others, more cautious, warned of the risks. "Do you know what will happen if we release this now?" one of the divers said upon returning, still panting. "They'll erase everything. They'll call it a fraud, and we'll be ridiculed like everyone else." The silence that followed those words was heavy, because, deep down, everyone knew he was right. The debate raged that night, amid the subdued sway of the sea. On one side, there were those who advocated immediate disclosure, driven by the euphoria of discovery. On the other, there were those who argued that exposing those images without additional solid evidence would be intellectual suicide. There were also those who feared higher powers, interested in keeping secrets buried. The archaeologist recalled stories of colleagues who lost entire careers by presenting inconvenient evidence. "Science isn't ready to accept this," he muttered, more to himself than to others. As the discussion grew, the emotional tension became apparent. Some technicians turned off their monitors, unable to continue watching. Others obsessively reviewed the recordings, fearing some detail had been missed. There was a sense in the air that they were dealing not just with an archaeological discovery, but with something that touched on much deeper structures: cultural, religious, political. Because if Atlantis existed and left traces, what else could have been hidden? And who would have an interest in keeping all this in the shadows? The mood on the ship oscillated between ecstasy and fear. The silence of the oceans now weighed heavily as a constant reminder that they were not alone on this journey. Each member reacted in their own way. Some took compulsive notes, others stared into the void as if searching for answers on the horizon, and still others simply remained quiet, unable to process the enormity of what they had witnessed. The expedition, until then, united by secrecy, began to fragment with uncertainty. The real challenge was no longer exploring the ruins, but deciding what to do with the truth that had emerged from the waters. That early morning, when the vessel was already surrounded by the silence of the ocean and the weight of revelation, the team began to realize that the discovery went beyond the simple realm of archaeology. What they had seen in the depths was not just a collection of ruins. It was a shock to the very fabric of human history as we know it. If those statues, symbols, and submerged chambers were confirmed as traces of a real civilization, then the entire foundation on which academic chronology rests would need to be revised. This meant admitting that peoples much older than we imagine possessed advanced knowledge of engineering, art, and perhaps even science. It was a reflection that frightened as much as it fascinated. The archaeologist, still trembling, isolated himself for a few minutes to gather his thoughts. He knew this was not only the fulfillment of a personal dream, but also a burden. Revealing the discovery to the world would mean confronting powerful institutions, governments, and religions that would not so easily accept the existence of a lost civilization with such a degree of advancement. At the same time, hiding what they had found meant betraying not only science, but humanity itself, which has the right to know its true history. The consequence was clear. Any decision would carry profound risks. For the divers, the reflection was more visceral. Some confessed to feeling that, upon entering that submerged chamber, they had crossed a spiritual barrier, as if awakening memories that did not belong to them. "It seemed as if the eyes of those statues were alive," said one, unable to find better words. Others claimed to have felt a strange vibration, as if the place was still charged with an invisible energy. For them, the consequence was not only scientific, but also existential. They were not faced with dead stones, but with a living testimony, which seemed to hold secrets beyond matter. Above ground, the technicians began to analyze the images more calmly. And the more they reviewed the videos, the more they realized there was no denying it. The alignments, symbols, and carvings were too complex to be the result of chance. This realization raised an inevitable question. If Atlantis truly existed and left such obvious marks, why have we never been allowed to see them? The most uncomfortable answer came naturally. Perhaps because it wouldn't be convenient for those who control knowledge to allow humanity to know its entire origins. Thus, amidst silent reflections and tense glances, the crew realized they had uncovered more than just ruins. They had touched a hidden nerve of modern civilization, our relationship with the past, with truth, and with power. The discovery could inspire a new era of inquiry or be stifled before it even reached the public, and it was precisely this uncertainty that left everyone uneasy. For deep down, they knew that the greatest burden lay not in what they had found, but in what they would do from now on, with the truth the ocean had entrusted to them. Night was falling upon the ship, but no one could sleep. The ocean, in its silent immensity, seemed to watch every breath, as if it were the guardian of an ancient secret that had been for an instant violated. The crew huddled in small groups, exchanging hushed words, trying to rationalize what they had witnessed. But the truth was, there was no simple explanation. What they saw didn't fit traditional theories, didn't fit textbooks or scientific conventions. It was something that demanded to be felt before it could be explained. And it was in this state of suspense that the team realized that the end of that expedition would not be an end point, but the beginning of a long and disturbing journey. The archaeologist, sitting in front of the switched-off monitors, pondered the price of his choice. He could keep the recordings, present them discreetly in closed circles, perhaps even sell them to a private collector. But this option gnawed at him. After all, he hadn't dedicated his entire life to studying them just to deliver the truth to a privileged few. At the same time, revealing everything meant facing a storm. He would be accused of fraud, the images would be questioned, and much greater forces could intervene to silence the discovery. The dilemma tore him apart, and in his eyes was reflected the weight of someone carrying a revelation that could change the history of humanity. Meanwhile, the divers remained restless. For them, the question was no longer merely academic. What they felt inside the submerged chamber seemed to surpass logic. Many described the sensation of being watched by invisible eyes, as if the remains were not dead ruins, but echoes of a consciousness still pulsing beneath the waters. One of them said quietly, "If this civilization has fallen, what guarantees that ours won't follow the same fate?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, echoing like a warning none of them would dare forget. The sea, indifferent to human anguish, remained calm that night. The dark vastness was like a cruel metaphor. They might have snatched away a fragment of the secret, but they would never master the whole enigma. Atlantis, or whatever that civilization was called, had left clues only to provoke more questions, and perhaps that was the greatest lesson. We are not at the pinnacle of history, but rather in a cycle that has repeated itself before, and could repeat itself again. The reflection was disturbing because it dismantled the modern arrogance of believing ourselves to be the first to conquer knowledge and power. Before dawn broke, the archaeologist gathered everyone together. There was no final decision, only a call. The world needs to know, but I'm not sure it's ready to hear it. The silence that followed his words was more eloquent than any argument. Each member understood that the responsibility was not only scientific, but also spiritual and moral. The end of that mission was not a conclusion, but a summons. And this is where the story turns to the listener. Myth, coincidence, or truth buried by the waters of time? Do you believe that Atlantis left its mark to be discovered now? Perhaps writing this answer is more than an opinion. Perhaps it is the beginning of a collective awakening to the true history that has been denied us.